Something strange is happening in East Palestine, Ohio. Thousands of dead fish floating down the river. Cattle and livestock dropping dead across the farmlands. An estimated 1 million pounds of a chemical called vinyl chloride, among others, have been released into the Ohio River Basin. That's the water supply for nearly 30 million Americans, setting the stage for what could be one of the most devastating disasters in American history, and the mainstream media refused to talk about it until the spread of information on social media made the topic unavoidable. As this story is breaking and continuing to develop, I want to do my part to break through to the facts. I'll give you a quick recap of the story, tell you what chemicals were aboard, talk about the media blackout and some of the strange official narratives. Social media has been doing a very good job in the past week and a half of making the mainstream media talk about this. Here's the story as we know it so far. A train run by BlackRock-owned Norfolk Southern derailed near East Palestine, Ohio on February 3rd, carrying a number of chemicals including 1 million pounds or more of vinyl chloride, which is a colorless gas used to make polyvinyl chloride or PVC. In the ensuing chaos, Norfolk Southern seems to have failed to properly contain the spill and dispose of the contaminated soil. Instead, they relayed tracks over the accident site to continue operating as scheduled. They literally covered this site up. Early on in the response to this crisis, the United States Environmental Protection Agency wrote a letter to Norfolk Southern, noting that materials released during the incident were observed and detected in samples from Sulphur Run, Leslie Run, Bull Creek, North Fork, Little Beaver Creek, and the Ohio River. And furthermore, that materials related to the incident were observed entering storm drains. Multiple rail cars and tankers were observed derailed, breached, and/or on fire. Let's take a look at what chemicals are present and what their health effects are. Vinyl chloride. This is the big one. It's a gas that can irritate the eyes, mucous membranes, and the respiratory tract, according to the CDC's Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. Chronic exposure to vinyl chloride can also cause permanent liver injury and liver cancer, neurologic or behavioral symptoms, and changes to the skin and bones of the hand. There's more to the story in terms of how the vinyl chloride was handled, but I'll get to that after the rest of these chemicals. Ethylene glycol monobutyl ether is a liquid and an acute toxin, known to cause devastating health effects in 3 stages. Stage 1, the neurological stage, occurs within 30 minutes to 12 hours after ingestion, and includes drowsiness, slurred speech, and irritation. Stage 2, the cardiopulmonary stage, occurs between 12 and 24 hours after ingestion, and includes breathing issues such as hyperventilation and tachypnea, or abnormal rapid breathing. Stage 3, the renal stage, occurs between 24 and 72 hours after ingestion, and includes heavily diluted urine, crystals in the urine, and kidney failure. The amount having been carried is unclear. Perhaps there was so little aboard that it will eventually be diluted. Perhaps not. What is clear is that some amount of this liquid went into the water and into the ground at the site of this crash. Ethyl ethyl acrylate is another liquid. Less deadly, it's an adhesive bonding material used commonly in tape, causing skin irritation, trouble breathing, and severe rash. Isobutylene, another bonding substance, this time used in rubber production, can cause headaches and dizziness, or can be fatal if exposed to in large doses. It's also a highly flammable gas. And butyl acrylate, which is a raw material for fiber processing agents, adhesives, coatings, plastics, and acrylic rubber. Another liquid, butyl acrylate, can cause dizziness, vomiting, and skin irritation. So, what's the big deal about the vinyl chloride in particular? Well, it's a gas, but it's transported as a liquid. How do they do this? They cool it to below freezing temperatures to keep it as a stable, dense liquid. When the train derailed, the responders were unable to keep the liquid cool. Fearing an explosion, they reasoned that a controlled burn would be the lesser of 2 evils. However, this controlled burn did end up sending a plume of toxic smoke into the air around East Palestine.
These aren't These aren't storm clouds. This is the shit that burned off in East Palestine. This is not storm clouds.
Norfolk Southern responded to the EPA letter, recounting their correspondence with First News out of Ohio. Norfolk Southern received the EPA's letter, and we have confirmed to them that we have and will continue to perform or finance environmental monitoring and remediation. Our hazmat team was in East Palestine within an hour of the incident, and the response continues today in close coordination with the Ohio and US EPA, NTSB, and other federal, state, and local agencies. Already, experts are weighing in on the disaster and the subsequent nuke dropped on East Palestine and the 10% of the American population that rely on the Ohio River Basin for water. Soil experts and hazardous material specialists are urging people in these areas to go to a doctor, get a checkup, and have it documented, so that 15-20 years down the line, they can benefit from the inevitable looming lawsuit. If you have friends or family in this area, be sure to pass this information along. Residents were evacuated following the disaster, only for officials to give the all-clear for them to return home days later on February 8th. Those in the area have reported scratchy, swollen throats, burning eyes, itching skin, and worse. Andrew Welton, a professor of environmental and ecological engineering at Purdue University, told USA Today that it's possible the burn created additional compounds the EPA might not be testing for. When they combusted the materials, they created other chemicals. The question is, what did they create? Well, we have an answer to that question. According to CBS News, when vinyl chloride is burned, two of the byproducts are phosgene and hydrogen chloride. Hydrogen chloride, when combined with water, as in our atmosphere, creates hydrochloric acid. Worst case, put simply, this year's forecast for the Ohio area is acid rain. And phosgene? The same gas was used as a weapon in World War I. The impact on the area's human residents may have been characterized as inconvenient and transitory, but the effect on wildlife has been devastating. Around 3,500 fish have died in the streams and tributaries impacted by the chemical spill. Ohio's Department of Natural Resources says, however, that none of those fish were endangered, and furthermore that there was no evidence of any deaths from the derailment in non-aquatic species in either Ohio or Pennsylvania. These claims are disputed by the residents, who have taken to social media and other outlets. One man in Palestine who owns a farm just outside the evacuation zone noted that his pet foxes fell ill and went fast after chronic bouts of diarrhea and difficulty breathing. Others have reported dead pets, dogs and cats, and livestock, like chickens, in the surrounding towns and villages.
My video camera footage shows my chickens were perfectly fine before they started this burn. And as soon as they started the burn, my chickens slowed down and they died.
In spite of this, the Ohio EPA maintains that the water is safe to drink. Fact check after fact check says the water is back to normal. No more fish are dying, and no land animals have ever died as a result of this disaster. On top of that, the testing is apparently being conducted by CTEH, an environmental consulting firm contracted by Norfolk Southern. This is the same CTEH that was hired by BP after the oil spill in 2010, before Congress investigated and demanded that the firm be replaced, after determining that they had manipulated information and even outright lied to cover their clients. Once for Knauf Plasterboard Tianjin to test their Chinese drywall for toxicity. After CTEH determined the drywall was not toxic, Consumer Product Safety Commission found it to be the top problem drywall for hydrogen sulfide contamination. They also fudged air monitoring tests, that seems relevant, for a breach in a coal mine's ash dam, and of course reported no problematic levels. In the course of their testing in East Palestine, the company apparently presented testees, residents of the area, with contracts to indemnify, release, and hold harmless not only themselves but Norfolk Southern. If their environmental testing firm is making residents sign liability waivers, What else are they doing? Eagle-eyed Twitter user James Bradley noticed that just before the derailment, the CDC altered their profile for vinyl chloride, even going so far as to remove an entire section on how the chemical affects children. An archive of the website displays a detailed FAQ page, with the profile initially having the following sections: How can vinyl chloride affect children? And has the federal government made recommendations to protect human health? Both of these sections were removed. The federal government has also shown a curious disregard for the incident in Ohio, with the Biden administration rejecting Ohio's pleas for FEMA disaster assistance. The DeWine administration has been in daily contact with FEMA to discuss the need for federal support. However, FEMA continues to tell Governor DeWine that Ohio is not eligible for assistance at this time. DeWine's office said in a statement to Fox News on February 16th, adding, Governor DeWine will continue working with FEMA to determine what assistance can be provided. Some online have pointed to Ohio's being a red state or a flyover state as possible or even probable reasons for the federal government's reluctance to help. FEMA reached out to Fox News and stated, FEMA is in constant contact with the Emergency Operations Center in East Palestine and with the Ohio Emergency Management Agency. We are closely coordinating with the EPA, HHS, and the CDC, who are helping to test water and air quality and to conduct public health assessments. So what are we to believe in all this conjecture? People are talking about false flags and bioweapons. These chemicals may be toxic, but they really are run-of-the-mill industrial chemicals. And while false flags are real things, they aren't common things. For those who aren't familiar, a false flag is a fake disaster. A terrorist attack, for example, that gives a nation somebody to blame and probable cause to declare war. The problem with this narrative is, of course, there's nobody to blame but Norfolk Southern and the Department of Transportation, perhaps. If there was no foul play, then why the media blackout? There are two obvious angles. Firstly, if derailments really are, as the Department of Transportation claims, so common that one just didn't seem newsworthy. And the second is that even if this wasn't on purpose, there's a person, office, or department that made a big mistake and does not want to take responsibility. People are pointing a lot of fingers in this area. Pete Buttigieg, a Trump-era deregulation that happened in 2015, maybe even Ohio's state government. It's too soon to tell. There is, however, a lesser-known angle, and it's this. Investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard own nearly $8 billion of stock in Norfolk Southern. They also own 18% of Fox News, 16% of CBS and 60 Minutes, 13% of Comcast, and therefore NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, and the Sky Media Group, 12% of CNN, 12% of Disney, and therefore ABC, 10 to 14% of Gannett, the parent company for more than 250 newspapers, including USA Today, 10% of Sinclair, which controls 72% of local TV stations, and an unspecified large chunk of Graham Media Group. BlackRock also has a very intimate relationship with the federal government, going back at least to Obama's presidency, where in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, they were his cabinet's top pick for buying up toxic assets that the Federal Reserve couldn't legally purchase. So the official narrative seems to be, trust us guys, it looks worse than it is. Now, there are two components to this line of reasoning. Firstly, that train derailments happen all the time, and second, that chemicals will dilute in a large enough volume to a point that they are no longer toxic. Now, both of these are true. Train derailments are more common than you may think, and dilution is pretty well understood. That's why you can, for example, drink bleach if it's mixed with enough water. Here's the problem. This isn't a typical train derailment. Look at this black cloud. That doesn't just happen dozens, hundreds of times a year. Secondly, how long does it take for these chemicals to dilute? And what happens in the meantime? Maybe the millions of pounds of toxic chemicals are already spread so thin that the black clouds are gone and the rivers are clear again. But that's not what the residents of East Palestine are saying.